Nightmare on Elm Street, Perchance to Dream. A short cab ride later, Ella heaved open the industrial metal door of the school Medilab and peered inside. A wash of dank, cold air hit her nostrils. She peered blindly into the darkness, wondering if they'd come to the right place. She could feel the distant thump of music rumbling along the steel floor, but couldn't see any light inside. She heaved the spring-loaded door further open and jammed her foot against it to hold it ajar, then motioned with her head for the others to join her. "Remind me again, what is this place?" "Medilab," Jen said briskly, peering around at the blackness. She popped a stick of bubblegum into her mouth. "Burned down last month. Didn't you hear? Couple of students got a bit too frisky around a can of ether. Blew the place sky high." She popped her gum, her face just visible under the starlight. "Can't believe you've never been here before." "Never." Ella gazed fixedly into the gloom, trying to make out the inside of the building through the darkness. She sniffed, then wrinkled her nose. There was a definite smell of burnt rubber in the air, and something worse underneath it. An acid stench that clung to the inside of her nostrils and coated her throat. She coughed, pulling a face. Nice. Henry sauntered past her, cheekily trailing one hand across the back of her hips as he did so. "I've been here before. It's a great make-out spot." Ella snorted. "In your dreams. And quit filling me up. Just 'cause I can't see you don't mean I can't feel you." She waved at the nighttime landscape behind her, where the white gleam of the new sports hall was just visible. "You want to cop a grope? Try hitting on one of those cheerleaders. They'll sleep with anyone." The words were out of her mouth before she could stop herself. Ella froze, then half turned and glanced at Jen. She didn't seem to have heard her. Relieved, Ella waited a couple more seconds before clearing her throat loudly. "So, is this place safe?" Jen pulled the gum out of her mouth and stuck it on the wall, gazing into the blackness. "Like, who cares? It's soundproof. That's the main thing. Don't want the cops showing up and kicking us out, do we? This is school property after all." "I guess." Ella waited a moment. "Are we going to go in?" "Please, after you," said Jen. She gestured to the open door. Ella glanced back at Jen, but her face was set, showing no emotion. "What am I, your minefield monkey? Come on, you said it was safe." "I did. I just want you to go first." "Fine." Ella screwed up her nerves and forced herself to step forward into the darkness, 1 foot at a time, holding out one hand ahead of her like a blind man. There could be anything in there. A break in the floor, a live electric cable hanging down, a killer waiting around the corner, knife poised. As Ella's eyes adjusted, she could just make out a huge door at the far end of the corridor. A faint glow of yellow light spilled out from underneath it. Feeling slightly more reassured, she stepped toward it, then paused, frowning. "You hear that?" "What?" "That." Ella's eyes flicked nervously around the dark corridor. This time they all heard it. A very faint but definite high-pitched scraping noise, like metal being dragged across metal. A loud, overpowering screech. Nikki shivered. "This place is seriously creepy. You sure you want us to go in there?" Jen snorted, tossing her head. "What, are you like 12 years old? Come on, Nick, it's just a spooky old building. You're into all that goth shit. You should be right at home here." She elbowed her way past Nikki and started off confidently along the corridor, her high heels clunking on the metal walkway. Ella exchanged a worried look with Nikki, then started off after her. Then she screamed shrilly as a dark shape jumped out at Jen, grabbed her by the shoulders, and dragged her to the ground. Ella screamed and turned to run. "Ella, come back!" Ella froze at the sound of the familiar voice, then turned and peered fearfully over her shoulder. Her shoulders sagged with relief, then she flushed with embarrassment. "Dimitri!" "Hey, ladies, how's it hanging?" Dimitri pulled Jen back to her feet and hugged her against his chest, grinning like a maniac. "Been watching those old 80s horror flicks before bedtime, have we?" "That wasn't funny." Jen cuffed at Dimitri, who held up his hands to protect his face. He laughed and grabbed Jen's wrist, pushing her back against the wall of the corridor and kissing her all over. She made a grumbling sound of protest and tried to push him away. Ella made eye contact with Nikki and pulled a face. Nikki giggled, then mimed sticking a finger down her throat. You guys have to do that in public? Dmitri came up for air. That's the fun of it. He winked at Ella. Hey, I don't know what you're complaining about. You're next, cutie. Ella's blush was visible even in the semi-darkness. Her mouth opened and closed a couple of times while she tried to think of an appropriate reply. How about you two just get a motel room, huh? 'Cause you're scaring the normal people. Dmitri shrugged, then laughed as Jen broke free from him, grouchily pulling her top back down. Cut it out, she said sharply. You always do that. Ella raised an eyebrow at Jen. Couldn't she see that Dmitri was just kidding around? She watched as he made a fresh onslaught on Jen, totally unfazed, sweeping her off her feet and trying to kiss her face while she slapped at him, half-heartedly protesting. Hell, if Dmitri were her boyfriend, she'd never snap at him, even if she were in a cranky mood. Jen just didn't know what she had. Ella felt Henry's questioning gaze on her, and shook herself. She reached out and casually tapped Dimitri's arm, feigning nonchalance. You get the wine? That and more. Dmitri licked his lips, then flourished a hand behind him. A large keg of beer was visible in the half-light, propped against the wall. You lovely ladies want to give me a hand? Getting it down the steps? Jen rounded on Dmitri. I thought I told you not to try and move that by yourself. If you hurt that knee of yours before tryouts on Thursday, I won't. That's why I'm getting you guys to help me, see? You're just women, so it doesn't matter if you get hurt. Dmitri grinned. You're a real hoot, muttered Jen under her breath. Ella watched Dmitri out of the corner of her eye, backlit by the torchlight, and felt her heart swell. She almost forgot just how gorgeous he was. When she was away from him, it was easy to convince herself he wasn't as cute as she remembered. But every time she saw him, she was smitten afresh. There wasn't a single thing not to like about the guy. From his strong, high cheekbone face to the powerful symmetry of his athletic figure. He wasn't a particularly big guy, but he gave the impression that he was. His broad shoulders perfectly balancing out his narrow waist. His well-defined six-pack just tantalizingly visible under the tight black t-shirt he always wore, like a kind of uniform. Tonight he was wearing sandy green combat pants with scuffed sneakers, which Ella found adorable. Everything else about him was so immaculate that she wondered if she scuffed his shoes deliberately just to look cool. The outfit was rounded off by a thick silver biker chain wrapped around his waist in place of a belt, and a single leather wristband with the name of some indeterminate rock man scratched into it. Dmitri was looking especially hot, but Ella doubted the logic of her coming here tonight. It wasn't like they'd get to talk much, and she would rather stick needles in her own eyes than watch Dmitri and Jen glide around the dance floor together. Mr. and Mrs. Perfection, while she sat on a stool by herself and drowned her sorrows. But she was here now, so she had to see it through. Stupid, stupid. As she watched, Dmitri turned around and grinned at her, gesturing at the beer keg. These things always seemed like such a good idea at the time. Ella grinned back foolishly, noticing how the flashlight lit up his eyes from the inside, turning them a rich coffee color. He was so damn cute. She realized he was waiting for some kind of reply. Yeah, sorry, they do. Dmitri nodded thoughtfully and grinned again, then turned away from her, busying himself with the barrel. Ella kicked herself. What was wrong with her? She could be cute and funny with every other guy in school, but this guy said one word to her, and her brain turned instantly to the consistency of Chinese noodles. He must have thought she was such a retard. It was the last straw. She would be dateless all the way through high school and die old and alone with only her 30 strange-smelling cats to mourn her passing. Sighing, she helped the others open the main door. Inside the Medilab, the party was in full swing. The fire-damaged room was practically a shell, the twisted blackened walls shored up by builder's jacks and caked in the dried remains of white firefighting foam. The place had a ghostly, unearthly feel, lit only by the flickering luminescence that poured forth from several hundred tea-light candles scattered across every available surface. Drifting dust glittered in the shafts of light, and the room was hazy with drifting cigarette smoke. Henry stepped up beside her and peered into the room. What's with the Sting video? Ella shrugged, gazing out at the dance floor. Over 100 revelers packed the floor, their writhing bodies picked out in flickering monochrome. as they danced to the techno music blasting out of the two massive portable speakers set up at the front of the room. Shot glasses and plastic beer cups littered the charred benches that lined the walls of the room, and the air pulsed with the energy that poured from everywhere in the place, heavy with swirling smoke and teenage pheromones. The dancers were all young students in their mid to late teens, and they were having one hell of a good time. They were dressed in an overlapping mix of styles and colors, representing every fashion from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Lithe young cheerleaders gyrated to the pounding beat, the feather boas and hippie beads strung around their necks in direct contrast to the ultra-modern miniskirts and goth-inspired studded wristbands. The boys wore fashion sportswear and too much cologne, the older guys wearing biker boots and grungy baseball caps, while the younger ones stuck to the tried-and-tested untucked shirt. Ella put her hands on her hips and looked around the room in bewilderment. "Who are these people?" "I told you," said Jen. "Everyone." "Oh." Ella licked her parched lips, then reached for a cup. All that exertion had made her thirsty. "Mind if I get a drink before we start the revelry?" "Go for it, girl." Jen took Dimitri's hand and led him off through the throng. Ella busied herself with filling her cup from the keg. Surreptitiously watching the pair as they found a spot in the middle of the room and began dancing together. Their bodies moved to a slow and sinuous beat that made only passing reference to the wild thud of the music. Ella felt a small knot of resentment begin to grow within her chest as she watched them hanging off of each other, oblivious to anyone else's presence. From the look on Dimitri's face, he had never known anyone more desirable in the whole world. If only he knew. A picture of Matt slammed into Ella's head, and she shook herself trying to stay focused. Now was not the time. It was inevitable that Dimitri would find out about Matt and Jen sooner or later, but it wouldn't be from her. At least, not as long as she wanted to stay friends with Jen. Ella felt someone step up beside her. Her eyes slid sideways and she groaned inwardly. The last thing she needed was some idiot hitting on her when she was trying to be miserable. She put down her drink with a petulant clatter and eyeballed the guy, who she vaguely recognized from her phys ed class. His name was Ralph, or it could have been Peter. Whatever, Ella sighed. Ralph/Peter was 5'0" of dogged persistence, in a grubby Skid Row t-shirt, usually found hanging around the computer rooms in school. He had lank black hair and breath that could strip the paint off a door at 10 paces. She knew he had a thing for her because every time she passed him in the corridor, he would turn the color of a fire extinguisher and stammer uncontrollably before running for the nearest exit. After ignoring him for as long as it was polite to do so, Ella sighed and looked down. Ralph's glassy smile broadened. "What?" she asked blankly, her attention still firmly fixed on the smooching couple in the middle of the dance floor. "You want to go, you know," he started. "You know what?" Ralph licked his lips and looked from Ella to the dance floor, then back again. Ella pretended not to understand. "What?" She asked him again, giving him her best fuck-off stare. It worked. Ralph's mouth worked silently for a second, a hint of desperation showing in his eyes. Then he gave up. "Oh, nothing. Never mind. Excuse me. I have to, He grabbed his drink and fled. "Harsh, girl." Henry stepped smoothly into Ralph's place at Ella's side and casually looped an arm around her waist. He was very warm and smelled faintly of red wine. When she didn't move away, he took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the dance floor. "Yeah, well?" Ella was in no mood to defend herself. She pushed her hair out of her eyes and pouted. "He started it." "Tread lightly, because you tread on my dreams." Henry gazed out at the crowd, a strange look on his face. "What?" "It's a poem." Henry leaned in closer to Ella, so she could hear him above the hot thump of the music. His lips brushed the side of her face as he spoke. "Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, I would spread the cloths under your feet." He lifted the arm around her waist until it encircled her shoulders and gave her a squeeze. "But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under thy feet. Tread lightly, because you tread on my dreams." He took another sip of his drink. "Yep, that's it, I think." He covered his mouth with a hand and gave a hearty burp. Of course, I paraphrase. Henry! Ella was genuinely impressed. I never knew you could read. My dad taught it to me, shortly before he shot himself. So much for the pen being mightier than the sword. Henry downed his drink and won, then carefully dropped his arm from around Ella's shoulders and gazed with interest at the beer table across the room. Oh, are those cookies? Ella turned, but Henry was already off, slipping through the heaving crowd. She watched him in bemusement, then glanced back over to the spot where Jen and Dimitri had been. They were gone. Shit! Ella quickly scanned the crowd, but the pair had completely vanished. She looked around for backup from Nikki, but her friend was deep in conversation with a macho jock in a leather jacket, gazing at him coyly and batting her eyelashes. He was examining the bandage on her wrist, looking concerned. Go Nikki, thought Ella gloomily. But what about me? Sighing, she put her drink down and flounced over to the side of the room. A bunch of filing cabinets had been overturned and stacked one on top of the other to create a makeshift bar, and a somber-looking DJ sat at one end, his dyed white dreadlocks bound up with the same black vinyl tape that crisscrossed his muscular body. He had daubed his ebony black skin with a dusting of flour, like war paint, and bright white tattoos wound their way up his bulging biceps. She took a seat by him and sat back, folding her arms. Hey, Scoot, you seen Dimitri? He left with the lady friend about 30 seconds ago. Right, thanks. Ella sighed. She'd just known that the pair of them were going to split, and here she was, all dolled up, and Dimitri was gone. She felt as though all the light had just gone out in the room, leaving her with nothing but emptiness. She wished heartily that she had never come out this evening. As though on cue, a distant rumble of thunder sounded, audible even above the music. Ella held on to her drink as the broken glass in the boarded-up windows rattled, eliciting a chorus of whoops and cheers from the hyped-up partygoers. A tattooed young girl wearing purple furry boots and a yellow builder's helmet jumped up onto the makeshift bar and began dancing in the candlelight, spraying them with the bottle of beer she carried. The party was a definite success, and everyone was having a great time. But somehow Ella just didn't feel like partying. Sighing, she sat back on her bar stool. She took a sip from her warm drink and pulled a face, gazing off into the far distance, as she imagined how this night would have gone if Dimitri had been hers. If only. Hey, cutie. Ella looked up into the light to see Dimitri standing over her. His shirt was unbuttoned to the waist, and his shoulder-length hair spilled loosely over his shoulders, lit by the flashing strobe lights. A glass of white wine dangled carelessly from one hand. Ella swallowed her drink, trying not to choke on it, and quickly wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, trying to hide her surprise. Hey, I thought you guys left. What happened to Jen? She had to split. She was in a bad mood. Dimitri shook his head, looking troubled. You know how she gets sometimes. Yeah, I do. I thought she was a little cranky tonight. Must be the end of the sale season at Prada. Ella smiled up at Dimitri, her heart pounding in her chest. Was she actually having a conversation with this guy? So, anyway, here I am, all dressed up with nowhere to go. Dimitri studied her, his head tipped to one side, an indefinable expression in his dark eyes. Do you want to dance for a bit? Yeah, sure, maybe. Maybe as in yes? Guess I've got nothing better to do. Ella quickly slid off her stool, unable to believe her luck. Jen could return at any moment, but she wasn't about to waste this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Dimitri gave a mock bow, then took her hand in his and led her onto the dance floor. As though on cue, the rapid-fire techno music died away, and a slow jam came on. The crowd miraculously melted away, making a space for them on the floor. Candlelight sparkled as Ella slipped her hands over Dimitri's shoulders and stepped in close to him, burying her face in the warm depths of his hair. She breathed in deeply. He smelled like cigarette smoke and whiskey, and after a moment she felt him slide his hands around her waist, running them up the smooth fabric of her dress, over the curve of her back. Ella lifted up her head and sighed happily, feeling her stress melt away. This was how things should be. Suddenly she didn't care who saw them together, or what happened if Jen found out. All that mattered was this moment. Dimitri's hands on her waist, his deliciously firm body pressed against hers. Ella closed her eyes, losing herself in the sensations. Dimitri stroked Ella's hair, then rested his hand on her shoulder, the wine glass still hanging from his fingers. But then, behind Ella's back, the wine in Dimitri's glass started to bubble, then boil. Within seconds, it had turned to steam and evaporated completely. Cracks crept up the stem of the wine glass as it started to melt, slumping down into a twisted sculpture of molten glass. It flopped over onto Dimitri's hand and rolled up his arm in a shimmering wave, coating it completely, solidifying into 6-inch long glass daggers at the end of his fingertips. Candlelight glinted off the razor-sharp points. Dimitri pulled back from Ella, then pressed his lips tenderly on her forehead before moving in closer, running his deadly glass-taloned fingers up towards her throat. Chapter 9. Jacob skidded around the corner and ran flat out down the road. Behind him he heard the sounds of pursuit, slamming doors, cobbled boots pounding on the sidewalk, the shouts of the cops as they chased him. They were fast, but Jacob had a good 30-second lead on them, and quickly lost sight of them as he dodged and ducked around a series of big-rig tankers parked outside a late-night gas station. He ran diagonally across the road and leapt up onto the sidewalk on the other side. His 5 years of incarceration hadn't been wasted. He had honed his body via the asylum's gym facility on a daily basis, working himself to exhaustion. Now all his hard work was paying off, and he was glad of every last ounce of muscle power as he increased his speed, angry shouts ringing in his ears. The night air was freezing, but Jacob paid it no heed as he jumped a low-slung rusty chain barrier and hurtled across a parking lot toward an industrial complex. The lights in the building were out, but Jacob ran toward them, hoping to find a door open so he could duck inside and hide. He slammed into door after door. They were all locked. Time for a change of plan. The thump of rock music drew his attention, and he hared around the side of the building to see the welcome glow of a late-night bar. Its neon sign cast soft pink and blue shadows across the asphalt outside as he raced toward it, looking frantically for somewhere to hide. He dived down behind a parked car and peered over the top, while the sounds of pursuit behind him grew louder. The parking lot was full, a lone motorcyclist sitting proudly astride his black Kawasaki street bike in front of the bar, showing off to a gaggle of scantily clad girls who loitered nearby. Late-night revelers spilled out of the open front door, lounging against the metal crash barriers and smoking. For a moment, Jacob stared at them in intense longing, unable to comprehend such a carefree existence. Then the thump of helicopter rotors sounded in the distance, and he jumped to his feet and strode quickly toward the door of the bar, trying to make it look like he was on his way to meet a friend. Too late. He remembered what he was wearing. Judging by the horrified looks on the faces of the revelers, he guessed that not too many people went to Billy's Blues Bar dressed in a blood-stained asylum gown. But it was too late to turn back. Ignoring the crowd that stared at him and whispered about him, he marched confidently up to the front door. Something nagged at his peripheral vision, and Jacob slowed his pace slightly, glancing tensely around him. There was a cop car in the parking lot. Shit! Even as Jacob was figuring out his next move, the cop stepped out of the bar, wiping his chin on a napkin and glaring around him. His eyes locked with Jacob's, and he froze, as though unable to believe what he was seeing. Jacob moved first with surprising speed, and he lunged to one side and headed straight toward the young biker, who still sat astride his motorcycle, revving the engine. A moment later, Jacob's fist connected solidly with the side of the biker's head, and he went down like a ton of bricks. Without breaking his stride, Jacob threw his leg over the seat of the motorbike, crunched his bare foot down on the kickstand, and screeched away from the bar with a spray of gravel. He hadn't ridden the motorcycle since he was young, but Jacob felt it all come flooding back as he sped across the parking lot toward the road. He reached across and flicked on the headlamps, then shifted his weight in the warm leather of the seat, gripping the tank tightly with his knees, and angling his body into the rushing wind. A feeling of elation slowly spread through him as he shot out onto the road, banked the bike around, and headed off into the night, almost giddy with the sensation of freedom. But he wasn't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. Almost immediately, a siren sounded behind him as the cop from Billy's bar screeched out of the parking lot in hot pursuit. A few seconds later, it was joined by a second siren, as the car from the alleyway caught up with him as well. Jacob sped up, gripping the handlebars tightly, as the Kawasaki flew up the deserted road, bouncing over potholes and weaving back and forth. He was exhausted, and his arms shook as he fought to keep the big muscle bike under control. A sudden burst of white light blinded him. The bike wobbled wildly as Jacob blinked rapidly, dazzled. The chicka-ka of rotors came from overhead, frighteningly loud, and Jacob realized the police helicopter had found him. Sons of bitches! Gritting his teeth, Jacob gunned the engine, accelerating as much as he dared, trying to stay ahead of the blinding beam. He threw a wild glance into his rearview mirror to see the 3 cop cars on his tail. Their whirling red and blue lights washed over him, and the piercing sound of their sirens filled his head. Shit, shit, shit! He had to get off the road, and soon, or he stood no chance. Bracing himself, Jacob slammed on the brake. The rear wheel started to skid almost immediately, but he held on tightly, focusing every ounce of his being on stopping the bike from sliding out from under him. It dropped back between the 2 speeding cop cars, so close that he could see the enraged expressions on the drivers' faces. As soon as he was behind the 2 cars, he hauled the bike around to one side, veering off into a side lane. The engine screamed in protest, but Jacob held on tightly, his eyes scanning the darkness around him for an escape route. Almost immediately, the white searchlight washed over him again, pinning him to his bike like a moth in a spotlight. Jacob swore and half-closed his eyes, struggling to see in the gloom as the light destroyed his night vision, filling his world with white static. And in that flash of light, a vision hit him. A young man on a bike just like his, a strong-boned, handsome face contorted in alarm. Then pain stabbed into his wrists, his ankles, his groin, as snaking black tendrils of wire tore themselves free of the motorbike and punched through his skin, digging through his flesh and winding themselves around his very bones, deep inside of his body. The metal beneath him softened in a flash of heat, and he screamed in pain as his exposed skin fused to it, literally melting him into the bike. A sensation of speed rushed over him, then a lurch in the pit of his stomach as the ground dropped away. Then a tree trunk flying toward him as unstoppably as fate. Then, in a flash, Jacob was back on the road again, the sound of police sirens ringing in his ears. Jacob slammed on the Kawasaki's brakes as hard as he could, not even aware that he was screaming as he clamped his body to the bike, willing it to not overturn as he powered down as hard as he could. The world tilted as the bike bucked across the road, hit a concrete incline at the forecourt of a gas station, and zoomed up the ramp. Panicking, Jacob wrestled with the bike, now out of control, white-knuckling the grips as it spun and jumped across the broken asphalt to the gas station. Smoke poured out of the tires as he hauled on the wheel, dragging it around in a tight circle and squeezing the brakes as hard as his numb fingers would let him. The engine cut out with a bang, and the bike shuddered to a halt. Jacob threw his leg down, catching the weight of the bike before it fell, and a moment later he levered down the kickstand with his other heel, then leaned the bike over. His entire body was shaking, vibrating with adrenaline and shock. It took him a moment or two to unclamp his fingers from around the handlebar grips. Then he swung his leg over the saddle and staggered away from it. Overhead, the helicopter buzzed down toward him, loud and angry like a demented wasp. Jacob reeled. His father had died when his vehicle had hit a tree. What kind of sicko vision had that been? It seemed so real. The police cars crunched up the slope behind him and screeched to a halt in a cloud of smoke. A voice broke the breathless silence. "Get your hands in the air now! Right now!" Slowly, Jacob turned. The cop had jumped out of his car, and the muzzle of his gun was centered right on Jacob's chest. The cop clicked off the safety catch, ready to fire. Popularity, Henry thought, was a lot like beer. It went to your head, and there was no such thing as too much. He flashed a quick grin at Nicky, who was sitting beside him on a lab stool, sharing a drink and a quick breather from the dance floor. She did not smile back. Shrugging, he picked up his drink and studied the assembled crowd, in the manner of an anthropologist watching chimps at the zoo. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with lithe, leather-clad bodies, and the party was really beginning to heat up, in more ways than one. Henry's gaze wandered over the crowd, marveling at the sheer diversity of people who had turned up for this thing. Jen's frequent secret location parties always made the top of the list on the unofficial school year calendar, and everybody who was anybody took great pains to be there, taking full advantage of the free drink and the opportunity to be seen. Because that, after all, was what it was all about, right? Nikki, on the other hand, quite clearly didn't want to be seen. Henry glanced at her inquiringly as she wriggled on her lab stool, pulling down her skirt for the 20th time in as many minutes. He followed her gaze and saw that her new jock friend had rejoined his buddies over by the far wall, who were giving Nikki sidelong glances and nudging their friend. Henry transferred his gaze to Nikki. She was watching the jocks out of the corner of her eye, sipping nervously at her drink. The white bandages on her arm glowed brightly in the semi-darkness. Henry gazed at the bandages thoughtfully. He could have sworn that they were on her other arm this morning. One of the jocks made a dirty comment to his friend, and the group laughed, a nasty sound in the close atmosphere. Henry glowered at them, making sure that they knew he was watching them, then banged the plastic drink mixer against his beer glass, making Nikki visibly jump. "Here's to friends, family. Oh, and having one hell of a good time. Cheers!" He clinked his glass against Nikki's and took a long gulp of the cold beer, which sloshed down his stomach to join the four that were already residing there. He licked his lips as the room spun gently around him and glanced at Nikki, who was readjusting her bandage for the umpteenth time that evening. "You know, it's so sad that you feel you have to do that," he said, watching her closely. "Do what?" Nikki looked up at Henry, and just for a moment her expression flickered. "What?" she said again, forcing a smile. "Cover for her?" Henry carelessly gestured with his glass, slopping a good quarter of it down himself. Nikki followed his gaze to see Ella sitting all by herself at the other end of the bar, staring moodily at an empty space on the dance floor, a wistful expression on her face. "What do you mean?" Nikki was genuinely curious. "Well, she's going to sit there miserable all evening, so you'll have to have all the fun for her. It's so obvious and deeply, deeply sad." Nikki gave him a shy smile, looking relieved. "Hey, I'm her friend. That's what I'm here for." She peeped at Ella over the top of her drink. "What's she so moody about tonight?" "3 guesses," Henry said, holding up 4 fingers. Nikki stared blankly at Henry, then jerked her chin in understanding. "Still Dimitri, isn't it?" "Who else is there for her to obsess about?" Nikki stared directly at Henry, a hint of a mischievous grin on her lips. "Good point." "Hey, watch it, smartass. I'm cute too, you know." Henry lifted a boot and pushed Nikki away from him on her stool. She giggled and slid back toward him. "So, you think we should go put her out of her misery?" "Nah, give the poor lamb a minute to herself." Henry pushed his white streaked hair back out of his eyes, then rubbed a hand thoughtfully across his jaw. He was feeling pretty good and pretty buzzed. All girls were a mystery to him, but Ella in particular seemed so full of secrets. Henry wished that she would talk to him, or at the very least make out with him. But she was a lost cause as far as he could figure her. She'd never get her head out of her ass long enough to notice that there were other men in the world besides Dimitri. Like him, for instance. Henry shook his head and sighed. He was such a loser, obsessing over a woman he couldn't have. He was as bad as her, in a way. He turned his head and stole another glance at Nikki. She, on the other hand, was very available. In fact, it almost shocked him how available she was. With one drink inside her, she was broadcasting it to every guy in the room. It was a good job she had him here to protect her. One flaw in the plan: he was blind drunk. Even the sorority girls at the bar were starting to look appealing to him right now. But Nikki was far cuter than any of them. And she had the most amazing, perfect, incredible pair of... "Hey!" "Huh?" Henry realized he was staring and glanced back up guiltily. Nikki was gazing down at him, a playful expression on her face. And it was such a pretty face. Cute button nose, pale hazel eyes, hiding beneath too much kohl eyeliner. a wide, generous mouth that was currently wrapped around a green bendy straw as she vacuumed up the last few drops of her melon martini. Treacherous thoughts stirred in Henry's brain, and he tried to concentrate on something else. They'd been through so much together. It would be weird to think of her as anything other than just a friend. Or would it? Nikki surprised herself by hiccuping and giggled in what Henry regarded as an insanely cute way. Okay, forget the just friends bit. Man, she was hot. It was funny, the more beer he drank, the hotter she got. Henry licked his lips, feeling sweat start to bead on his brow. It couldn't hurt to ask. "Want to dance?" "Sweetie, I thought you'd never ask." "Lead the way, then." Henry took Nikki's hand, led her through the crowd onto the dance floor. "Too bad Matt's not here to see this. He's probably at home in bed by now, loser." On the dance floor, Ella swayed dreamily to the music. Her arms wrapped tight around Dimitri. The world faded away around her, and the pulse of the music got slower, 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 lulling her into a contented trance. This was where she was meant to be, in Dimitri's arms, and she felt warm and safe, and more contented than she had felt in a long time. She breathed in so repetitiously. Dimitri smelled so good. She wondered what he would look like naked. An unconscious giggle escaped from her lips, and she quickly smothered it, feigning a yawn that quickly turned into a real one. The alcohol in her system was making her sleepy, and her eyelids felt so heavy. It was late at night, and right now she wanted nothing more than to lay her head down on Dimitri's shoulder and close her eyes. So she did just that. Behind her back, Dimitri's glass-taloned hand crept slowly upwards, his fingers caressing Ella's hair, then her back. A stray beam of candlelight glinted off the end of his razor-sharp claws as they slid over her soft skin, then hooked under the strap of her bra, lifting it gently off her shoulder. Dimitri smiled to himself, his face buried in Ella's hair. His fingers moved further up, brushing over her jugular. "Hey, are you okay?" Sitting on her bar stool, Ella blinked and jerked her head up, snapped out of her happy little daydream. The diminutive Ralph was standing in front of her, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. He was almost dwarfed by the enormous jug of beer he held in both hands, like a sporting trophy with a giant sparkly cocktail umbrella. What? Said Ella, glaring down at Ralph. Gee, she couldn't even get 5 minutes of peace in this place? Well, it's just that... Ralph gulped, his pace fell. He glanced down at his hands, then his words came out in a rush. "You've been sitting there looking all sad for like 10 minutes now, and I'm worried about you, because you usually look so cheerful. At first I thought that maybe I'd upset you. Then I talked to your friend Jen, and she said that maybe you were just tired. But then I suddenly realized that perhaps you were feeling weird because you got arrested today. And so I told her that, and she got this real funny look on her face. And then her boyfriend..." "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa!" Ella put her glass down on the bar with a thump. "What did you just say?" "What? About you being tired? Well, I was... No, the other thing." Ella swiveled around on her bar stool so that she was facing him and fixed the quivering boy with a piercing look. "Ralph, what did you say to Jen?" "Oh, about you being arrested? I just told her what I saw, and I..." "You saw?" "Yeah, I was there, remember, when the cop was taking you to his car? You looked up at me, and I waved to you." Ralph smiled dreamily. "I think the sun was in your eye or something, because you didn't wave back, but then looked over and gave me this amazing little smile." Ralph's voice tailed off as he saw the expression on Ella's face. "Remember?" Ella rubbed her head, suddenly feeling very tired. "No, Ralph, it's been a long day." Ralph paused, then glanced up at Ella shyly. "That's okay. Hey, I don't suppose you'd like to come see me play on Saturday. Only we've got this big match down at the arena with free food and cheerleaders and everything. And I could pick you up at your house if you didn't want to drive. And, oh..." Ralph stepped back as Ella stood up, her eyes scanning the room with a sudden urgency. "Do you have to go now?" "Yes, Ralph, I have to go." Ralph's face fell. "Okay, then. I hope you have a lovely night, Ella. Enjoy the party, and I hope you feel better soon." "Yeah, whatever." Ella grabbed her jacket. "Oh, and Ella?" "What?" "My name's Peter. It's not Ralph, but it's okay." Peter took the umbrella out of his beer and tossed it into an ashtray, then turned and shuffled off into the crowd. Ella watched him go, frowning, then shook herself and quickly strode off toward the door. Whatever. She had to find Jen and nix the rumor before it got started. If she didn't find her soon, then by morning the whole school would know. Ella walked quickly up the steps and pushed her way through the charred door. The darkness on the other side made her pause for a moment, but then she plucked up her courage and started forward into the blackness with confidence. 5 minutes later, and she was still walking. She couldn't see a thing. She had been so stupid not to bring a candle to help her find her way out. The exit door seemed to have vanished without a trace. Maybe she'd gone past it? Ella sighed to herself, then turned on the spot and walked back in the direction she had come from. She could just have to go back to the party room and start again. Another 5 minutes of hard walking later, she was beginning to seriously freak out. There was no way she'd walked this far from the main door. She strained her ears, listening for the thump of the music from the party, but the thick metal door had muffled and deadened the sound until it was nothing more than a directionless noise, coming from somewhere underfoot. Okay, stop, think. Ella stopped dead and stretched out her other arm, groping for the opposite wall. Her fingertips wafted through empty space. Where the hell was she? Ella closed her eyes and counted to 10, more annoyed than scared. Each second she was in this place was another moment for Jen to call up one of her gossip monger friends and spread the word about her. She now realized why Jen had left the party so early. The walls were so thick she probably hadn't been able to get a signal on her cell phone down there. She had some hot gossip and she just couldn't wait to tell everybody. Ella started walking again, one hand on the wall, marching forward in the blackness with increasing urgency. Jen just didn't think about what she was doing. She never did. She dearly loved to be the center of attention, to be the one in the know. Gossip was like oxygen to that girl. She swore that she didn't spread rumors maliciously, but calling up 10 friends and swearing them each to secrecy, damn, that was akin to taking out a full-page color ad in the Springwood Times. She should know better than that. Ella's light, sensitized eyes made out a dim red glow far up ahead of her. She paused, then started marching resolutely toward it. I said, hands in the air now! Jacob stood silhouetted in the spotlight of the chopper, staring into the muzzle of the gun pointed at his chest. The light bounced off the cop cars surrounding him, turning them a glowing white, like a beacon of law in the darkness. Shit, talk about trigger-happy. Jacob ran the tip of his tongue over his dry lips and stared at the cop. He let his hands drop to his sides and flexed his fingers, breathing shallowly. Otherwise, he didn't move a muscle. Right now! Jacob held the cop's gaze for a moment, inspecting him with a kind of detached intensity. Sad, slightly sunken eyes held perhaps 30 years of disappointment with the world. Pants, a couple of inches too short, sandy, badly cut hair, flushed face, his forehead glistening with sweat. He probably had a young kid and a wife who ironed his shirts and temped on minimum wage. Jacob dropped his gaze to the cop's gun, currently leveled at his chest. Standard issue 9mm. Customized barrel, pistol grip polish, till it gleamed like the sun. Vegas showgirl decal slapped onto one side, now tatty with age. Despite his bluster, Jacob saw the cop's gun was shaking. The cop was afraid. Of what? Him? An unarmed kid in a dirty nightgown? Hands up now! Jacob closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling his confusion and exhaustion blend together in his mind like a deep scarlet whirlpool. His head swam for a moment, black speckles danced in front of his eyes, as a great wave of tiredness swept through him. Kid, don't be stupid, kid. Just don't be stupid. There it was, that thing in the back of his head exploding into life and swamping his brain. The thing he had tried so hard to hide all of his life. It was hard and cold and hot all at the same time, and it glowed a blinding white, like a ball of radiation at the back of his skull. Jacob didn't know what it was, but it scared the shit out of him. A second cop jumped out of the car behind the first and aimed his own gun at Jacob, his hair whipping in the wind of the rotors as the helicopter hovered above him. You heard him, Sonny. Put your hands in the air and kneel down slowly. Or what? Jacob's voice was a dry whisper. His eyes were still closed. You'll shoot me? I don't want to shoot you, kid, but I'll ask you again, hands in the air right now. No, said Jacob. He felt the anger start to build inside him, like oily waves crashing against a dam. They wanted to take him back to Weston Hills and lock him up for no reason, other than they didn't understand him. 5 years he'd been locked down in that dump. 5 years. That time was gone forever, and he could never get it back. He should have been at school, going to proms and bars and hanging out with his friends, dating girls and driving around in a beat-up car with chromed headlamps and blue flames painted over the wheels. Instead, he had spent it staring at the inside of a blank wall day after day after day, enduring tests and choking back their goddamn zombie juice like a good dog, all the while hoping and praying that whatever was wrong with him would get better so he could go back to his life and be normal, like the rest of the kids. 5 years. This is your final warning. I mean it, kid. Jacob's fist clenched, and he raised his eyes again. That thing in his brain screamed at him, begging to be released. He ignored the first cop and turned to the newcomer, an overweight man with small eyes and graying hair. Fuck the both of you. I'm going home. The cop's eyes got smaller still. He bristled, raising his gun to head sights. Don't make me do this, son. Jacob sighed, feeling resignation bubble up within him. Then he glanced down and pointed. Do what? Shoot me with your safety on? Both cops' eyes flicked downward to their guns. It was an instinctive response, and he'd been counting on it. For a split second, their attention wavered. Electrifying his nerves, Jacob released the dam in his head. The cops screamed. Okay, this has been the rest of Chapter 8 and all of Chapter 9 of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Perchance to Dream. Sorry I couldn't drop any chapters yesterday. There was just some things going on that were out of my control. But I'm back today, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more of this great book. Let me know in the comments section what you think of Jacob, who is obviously the kid from Dream Child, coming back in this book form, and what do you think he just did to the cops? You know, we might find out tomorrow. I don't know. I haven't read this book yet, but wonder why they were screaming. You know, I can't wait to find out exactly what went down there. But yeah, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments section. I'll be back tomorrow with some more. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and pleasant dreams!